Yes. I'm the odd one out for this talk today because I'm the odd one who is not working on language teaching in classrooms, and I'm happy to be able to start. So in a way I sit as a kind of unit on my own here. The talk has, I stole a very famous title for this talk. That's of course Ed Hutchins' book on cognition in the wild, and this, in a way, is a bow to Ed Hutchins and this work, and the reason I stole it is partly described by Hutchins' quote here, or the quote from Hutchins. Hutchins studies nautical navigation in different kind of nautical vessels. So he looked at bigger warships, he looked at canoes, and his point has been to see how artifacts in this activity in nautical navigation enhance cognition, and how cognition in a way is the point of departure for developing and changing artifacts. And what he tries to describe is how cognition and artifacts and human activity influence and coexist and influence each other. So what I want to take from him is that I want to study, or what I'm doing in my study is to look at conversation in what he would call naturally occurring, culturally constituted human activity. Of course, classrooms are part of this. Classrooms are a natural habitat for learning. That's not the point. So I'm not here to argue against classroom or against teaching. The point is there are other habitats for language learning, and we do not know very much about these other habitats. So what I try to do is to, in this talk today, to show some of these other habitats and to have a little bit of a different display on cognition and on learning and on research methodology, and of course on language. So let me start with the task. Gabriele sent us a task to say you should give an example for your work, and what I did and sent to my colleagues were 3 papers, and that's where what I want to build on. They are actually on the first page of your handout. It's a paper I wrote 2004 together with Rineke Bauer, a colleague of mine, where we looked at several interactions in a row. So we looked at several people who had first, second, and third meetings, or actually this was about telephone calls. And what we noticed in the first encounter was huge chaos, overlaps, code switching, pauses, unorderliness. And what we then saw emerging through three actually encounters, in the third encounter already in some cases, were a very, very well orderly organization of what we looked at the time, the opening of calls. The point had been for us in what we think we saw is that one of the major resources, a major part of what's going on is not about learning or establishing some kind of opening activity, but building social relations. Because what happened through these very few calls to the same person is that these people knew each other. So they could, in their later calls, build on the experiences and the talk which has been appeared further. A number of studies have appeared since the early 2000s. We looked at different kind of interaction outside of classroom activities, and my second paper in a way gives an overview. But what I would like to start with is a third paper, which is a paper delivered to the Participatory Design Conference later this year, and is a common project between designers, design anthropologists, and people who work with language teaching. And if I say designers, it's not that these are people who only form beautiful objects. Actually, they designed this T-shirt, and I think we agree it's not very beautiful. So designers, at least designers in modern design education, do other things. They study the relations between users of different type and the objects and environments in which these users are organized or have their life, and then they try to modify these objects and the interactions according to interest the users formulate in relation or in cooperation with the designers. So in a way, this is user-centered design, and if you enter user-centered design, I have some reference on the side, which are as well on the first page of the handout. Designers always talk about the future, and I thought it would be an interesting thing to say, okay, what kind of future are we talking about here? I think we are talking about three ways of future here. One is if you organize learning environments inside or outside the classroom, you are part of the design of these people's future, because you design what kind of thing they can do with the language afterwards. If you, as I will show later, move them into interacting with the community, you move them in a different way, and then if you, in a way, have a more linguistic focus. So what teachers do in classes, or what learners do in connection with trainers, is something which has to do with their future as a language speaker. The second thing, of course, is we are talking about which way language teaching can go. And in a way, this is a bit of a bigger picture. If I look at the situation in Northern Europe, especially in Denmark, we have been losing languages and language training for 30 years. So there are fewer students in the class who learn foreign languages. Actually, they only have to learn English now and then another 101 language on the side. Before that, they learned 3 languages. We have lost educations in Italian, in French at several universities. We are about to lose Spanish, simply because the students don't have a perspective, a life perspective as language teachers, partly because there are too few people in the at least secondary school to learn languages. And just before I left, I read a comment from the University of Copenhagen, which is the biggest university in Denmark, where they said, well, all subjects where less than 30 students start a year will have to release resources when they get free by people leaving the jobs, and these resources will get into or will be moved to other fields. And that will threaten German, Spanish, and English. So what we see at the moment is that language studies actually disappear, partly because the customers disappear. Well, but there are customers around, and these customers are much more people who migrate to different countries and want to learn the local language. And this is, in a way, the constituency I'm interested in. So what we see in the second group is much more a convergence between teaching environments, learning environments, and using environments. Very often these people go to class once a week, an evening class, but they are living in the world of the second language, and there are ample opportunities to develop their language competences. Problem is, they are not very much experienced on that, as far as I see. Well, the third one, and there the designer comes in, is, of course, that if you try to work with designers, you would cooperate with new players in language education, and I think that's one of the things I want you to show. I can see I should maybe be a bit faster in what I'm doing. Well, the project is called Språkskap, which is Swedish and means språk is language, skap is something like landscape. The word in landscape is the second part of it. Or in citizenship, it's the same kind of word. So it's in a way pointing to the environment in which language is organized. And the people who started it are Carl Lindemann from the Folkuniversitet, which is the biggest course provider in Stockholm, part of the University of Stockholm. In design terms, he is the prominent owner. And he has been talking with Brendan Clark, who is a design anthropologist, works with us in Denmark in the Speyer Research Center, and in Stockholm with the Interactive Institute, a government body on innovation. And Brendan is American, starts to learn Swedish, and it doesn't really go very well. So as a designer, he said, well, couldn't we do something about it? And then they brought in the group where I belong to, which is a language research center at the University of Southern Denmark, with my colleagues working on different kind of language acquisition. Teresa Cadiano on thinking for speaking, Søren Eskildsen on usage-based linguistics, and 3 students working on different parts of these areas. And the second one is actually a real design company which designed material objects for learning environments. Okay, what we then get is a kind of flurry thing of different things which, well, belong together and have to be explained one at a time. I try to freeze this. Okay, so what this Spokescope project did is to say, okay, if language learners actually are much in the language encounter out of the classroom, we could go out and create, and that's the right corner right down here, language-friendly or learning-friendly environments out of the classroom. So we could go, and that's what we have done, to cafes, to bakeries, to service encounter places, and talk to them to provide resources for language learners which they can use when they do whatever the service encounter does. On the other hand, have certain kind of tolerances for people who come in and spend 2 minutes on formulating a single turn. So in a way, these service encounters and other places are developed as kind of language coaches or folk coaches where people do whatever they do, but they are sensitive that some of the customers are actually people who want to learn the language and are not interested to do the business in English as fast as possible, but in Swedish with as much as language activity as possible. The activities of the learners was driven by events, or you could say tasks. That is, the learners defined what they would like to do, and then they went out trying what they want to do, documented it, and reflected and shared it with the others. So if you look at the activities on the right side, there were drop-in sessions where students could come and discuss with their trainers and teachers the experience they did outside of the classroom. There were the blogs where they could share. It's a closed blog, so only the students of that group could share it. And there were Twitter, and some days at least, where they could immediately get access to some kind of coach to solve some of the problems they wanted to do. Well, 2 things are maybe a little bit more explanation. One of the activities in the drop-in sessions were a mapping of the social relations where the students, or which the students inhabit. This is, I don't know how much you can see, but the student is a thing in the middle, and the student is, in a way, encircled by different kind of social environments, and the task of this thing is to figure out where are my possible counterparts in using Swedish, and where are the resources in my environment which I could go and use to practice Swedish and to learn more of it. That was one thing. The other one I want to show is, of course, if you look at this kind of design, it works with 3 different blocks which in a way inform each other. One is what they call pure talk, or what you could call conversation or talk or action in the world, in the wild. Then this belongs together with building communities in which you live and in which you, in a way, live in the second language. And that, is, of course, is again reflected in the language matters by the Kursverksamheten, or the Swedish school, and the different sessions where the students actually could come and discuss their language challenges. Okay, if that's what we do, then of course the question is, why do you do this kind of thing, and what does it have to do with learning? And this is, of course, a main argument. I would like to show you some examples of learning. And the first one is from a design workshop, again, where we worked with companies and users who, in this case, constructed a new type of steering unit for a backhoe loader. And it's, in this case, the back part, the digger. And the point is that there should be new technologies involved in running such a machine. So there was a design, or several design workshops with users. That means people who drive this kind of thing and people who build this kind of thing, and engineers. And at a certain point, we have an artifact designed by the guy standing in the shadows about here, with Kees, who is an engineering student. He designed some kind of yoke, like in an airplane, where you have two horns in your hand and you can turn the whole thing left and right, and then the machine is doing the same kind of movement. This woman is sitting in a makeshift cabin, which has the size of the cabins of these machines. Before her is a video simulation which shows the movement of the machine while she is moving the steering yoke. This is the first time she sits there, so she hasn't have any experience with this kind of thing before. And let's see what she does the first minute.
I need to look a little bit.
Yeah.
But maybe it should be more like you're looking for the intuitive approach somehow.
It's really experience. Feel how it works, feel what it does, and then...
But this is... Yeah, but these are... I can work with this. This is quite fun. This I would have expected to be opposite.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So this takes about a minute. She starts by saying, okay, what it is actually you want from me? Do you have a certain kind of theory? And they say, oh, just go ahead and try and get your feeling about what this kind of machine does. Then she does it, and she has indication of what she does and what she gets. So, oh, this is that, and this kind of thing. And then after about a minute, she moves into evaluation and said, well, I have expected that this left handle would work in the opposite way. I play it once again for you.
I need to look a little bit.
Yeah.
But maybe it should be more like you're looking for the intuitive approach somehow.
It's really experience. Feel how it works, feel what it does, and then...
But this is... Yeah, but these are... I can work with this. This is quite fun. This I would have expected to be...
So after about a minute, she is into evaluation what she actually just learned. So we can talk about learning here, a learning process which is visible for the other participants, a learning process which is very fast and not really problematized as a learning process. She just goes in and tries something, and she is able to handle this machine. And the question, of course, is, and before my colleagues later in discussion ask, what on earth does this have to do with language learning? I ask the question myself. I think it's, well, is this something we can use for language learning? And the second video I want to play for you is a bit earlier in the same workshop, where Kees is standing here and explains how this yoke works. Left of him is Thomas, who is a second designer, a design student. On the right, we have Thorin, the woman who was just testing this machine, and behind her is Lars, I think I called him, who is an experienced driver. And they are coming back in this workshop after having discussed all kinds of solutions, try to figure out if this is a good way of doing it or not. So at this point, Kees is explaining the different function of this steering yoke and says something about turning the whole machine left and right. And I just play it for you. The transcript is on the back side. There are three colors. Black is what they say. Blue is a kind of word-by-word translation, and red is an idiomatic translation of what you see. Some more handouts if you need one. Okay, I play.
Then the swivel, that's actually a rotation of the whole thing.
The whole backhoe.
Yeah, the whole backhoe arm, yeah. Is there a good name for that?
Okay, ik arm. Like that.
Yeah, interesting.
But the rotation,
Ja,
it's just,
rotering, ja.
Altså coil, eller hvad man siger, men det er jo ligesom mere, it's a big taking machine with
tracks.
with tracks. And
Yeah.
then the whole machine is turning
Yeah,
around.
that's
That
different, yeah.
it's named to coil. The whole machine.
I named it swivel.
We don't have so much time to run through it line by line, but what happens here is that the Kees introduces a name for what he is describing now. He calls it swivel. And while he's doing it, he is doing a lot of gesture to show the movement of the machine. The gesture is taken up by his co-presenter Thomas on the left, so they both are gesturing. The gestures are taken up and mirrored by Sven, who is standing behind, but you can see still his hands. Sven then comes with a tri-marked formulation or reformulation of how he heard, or what he heard Kees saying. This is a rising intonation kind of thing where you indicate, I'm not sure, but give me a response if this is my correct understanding or not, or what you want to tell me. And then they actually move into alternative expressions. They code switch into finding a Danish word for this, and when they're done, Kees sums up and say, okay, I still call it swivel. What they do here is they agree or negotiate a term for a certain activity and make sure in different ways that they really refer to the same kind of thing. I just played for you once again, even though I take a lot of my precious time. Look at the gesture.
Then the swivel, that's actually a rotation of the whole thing.
The whole back of
Yeah, the whole back arm, yeah. Is there a good name for that?
det kan komme op.
Jo, det kan jeg sige.
But the rotation,
Ja,
it's just,
rotering,
Altså coil, eller hvad man siger, men det er jo ligesom mere, it's a big taking machine with
tracks.
with tracks. And
Yeah.
then the whole machine is turning
Yeah,
around.
that's different,
It's named to coil. The whole machine.
I named it swivel.
So it's, it takes a bit of time to go through because you have all these language issues there, but you can read it if you want afterwards. My point is that this is about language, at least lexical issues, but it has a lot of the same features of what I showed earlier in learning to manipulate this engine. So it's something which happens all the time. And as I would argue, and I think, I'll come back to that, you can see language learning in the wild as a lot of small experiences with language and learning of language, which sum up and sediment somehow. The somehow is a problem. And in both cases, it's observable for participants. They can see what you, as a speaker, are doing, and they take part and share into this kind of defining your or defining the term here. What is, I think, the most relevant thing here is that there are displays of understanding from all participants in this. So it's display of trouble, which is done very early about this swivel kind of thing, and we could look at the positioning of the item in the turn to show that more. But it's at the end the display of understanding, which then is in a way the step to close it down and move on in the activity. And I think if we look at these kinds of displays of understanding, which are done in very, very different ways, we maybe come closest to what some of the other papers today are saying, because things in another terminology would be maybe prompts and recast and this kind of phenomenon. I have a different terminology which is more sequential, while the one we will see later is more instructional. But I think this is a possible joint interest, and the whole discussion about noticing would, in a way, be here as well. If you look at what people do in interaction, they all the time notice, but they have a myriad of resources to show each other that they are noticing. And I don't think we know so much about it at the moment. Okay, the way I'm working, just 5 minutes to cut that very shortly. As all people in conversation analysis, I work with natural occurring data. That is data I got somewhere and try to, in a way, mine the data for the phenomenon I'm interested in after they are transcribed, and you can see they are seriously transcribed. And then in CA, you build collections of instances. So you spend a lot of time to figure out if two cases are instances of the same kind of thing. And then you try to give a description, which is a description of the practice of the humans in the situation. It's not a description of the linguistic practice, it's a practice of action in which this kind of thing is done, like negotiating or getting control of a lexical item, as we have seen before. So we can't do collection at the moment, we don't have the time, but this example on swivel would go into one of the possible collections about lexical appropriation. If you look at the research, what has it turned out until now? It has turned out descriptions of participants doing language learning, doing recognizable activities where they tell themselves and each other that what they do now is focusing on language, language form, language expressions, and so on. So it's not something which in a way flows into people, it's something people do and is recognizable for other people. What has turned out as well, that outside of classrooms, what you could call the experts or native speakers or advanced speakers are normally building on the intersubjectivity, on the business of the talk. They want to drive the interaction into where they go. If you go to of these spokescorp encounters and go to these cafes, the people who sell coffee are interested in selling coffee and not talk about language. So the drive into going further the business is always coming from the natives or the local speakers, while we can see that the people who try to learn the language very consequent work on forms and try to get the chance to test out forms in what they're doing. So there is, I think, a number of studies which shows us very nicely this division of labor between the experts or more native speakers and the others. The point is, of course, that at a certain point the language learning process is over and you have a language, or the understanding process, solving a problem in the interaction is over, and you will get a product of learning. The question is, and that's, I think, the point where we are in, at least where I'm in this field, is to get the data to do more coherent description of that. And let me just jump to the next slide. There are a number of resources available to do that now. Of course, we need longitudinal studies of this kind of interaction in non-pedagogic environment or even in pedagogic environment. As I said, that is a possible habitat as well. There are some databases around. The MELK database in Portland is a several-year classroom database which is accessible over the internet. John Hellerman is working with that, and he will in his talk, I'm sure, show that. So there is actually lots of teaching material, or classroom material, sorry, available. We are building databases on whatever we can get in language, long-time language learning environments. The Icelandic base is from people there up to 3 years, where they tape their everyday conversation, half an hour every day. This is not, all of it is not transcribed, but it's there and it's available. It's on TalkBank. You need a password, but it's available. We're building other databases. I think this is the way we will go, creating these databases and sharing data. And the last thing I can do is invite everybody who has data and doesn't really need them anymore and want to give them to other people who might use them, give them to us, we put them to TalkBank, and we'll I think, in this way advance what we know about language learning.
Thank you, Johannes.
We're going to need a few minutes to set up the technology, so just relax.
So, and then, yeah.
It's on now.
I need the technicians, it's not working.
Forse tirarlo un po' su.
Not really with these studies short. The other webs, they could be faster.
Trascinare su questa finestrina. Non si fa scivolare. Ah,
Yeah, we are less written.
audio. Bisogna anche dell'audio.
Fabio, abbassami l'audio, sennò faccio casino. Tirami giù l'audio.
And not, oh, that's full stop. Okay. Photographs. Okay. The story went.